are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to the website for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also, subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Joining me today, I have Manny Navarro, the legendary reporter from South Florida, joining me from The Athletic. He's one of the premier writers over there at The Athletic, kind enough to join me today. Thanks for joining me today, Manny.
Thanks, Marcus. I just got back from a haircut, and I can tell I'm getting old because all the hair that's fallen off of my face and off of my head is gray now. So I've been doing this a long time. So I appreciate you treating me with kind words and giving me lots of love. I have been in South Florida for a long time, covering this team, this program, and appreciate coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you once again. But the Miami Hurricanes got 1 week in the books as far as fall camp is concerned, and there were a lot of storylines kind of going into camp and some storylines developing as well. So I just kind of wanted to touch on the storylines and maybe talk a little depth chart here, and also kind of talk about, the hype train that's going on with this team because it's crazy. I mean, it's kind of like every year, though, as far as the hype is concerned with the Miami Hurricanes. It's like death taxes and overhyping the Miami Hurricanes are things you can count on every year and with this team. So, first and foremost, just the storylines that are most intriguing to you right now with this Miami Hurricanes football team.
Well, I came up with 3 that I thought were kind of big picture for the program, and one that's a little bit more closely related to the roster and just the makeup of the actual X's and O's on the squad. I think number one for Mario Cristobal, it's can he get rid of the stigma attached to his name as a game day coach? Everybody knows he's a phenomenal recruiter, but I really think last year's loss to Georgia Tech hangs over his head nationally. There are a lot of people who look at him and look at this program and have their doubts because they say, well, he's going to make another bad decision in the fourth quarter and blow a game that he shouldn't. And I think that's one of the most intriguing storylines nationally for this team, right? Because everybody respects Mario and what he does on the trail. He's always going to have elite recruiting classes. He's building this thing the right way. But he's got a reputation now for being a guy who doesn't know what he's doing on Saturdays and is going to blow a game. So I think can he get rid of that stigma attached to his name is the biggest one. From a national perspective. Agree or disagree with that, Marcus?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think everyone knows that Mario is a fantastic recruiter. I think acquiring talent is definitely his strong suit, especially now with the transfer pool as well. But can he, make the right decisions in crunch time? I mean, this is not the first time. Like last year's debacle against Georgia Tech wasn't the first time. We've seen this from Cristobal. So I think everybody who watches and follows this team will be nervous if this team is in a close game late. So we'll see if he can break that stigma.
Well, another one that I had is this team mentally tough enough to withstand the loss? Being around this program as long as I have, Marcus, it feels like, at least in the last 20 years, every time Miami loses a game, the locker room falls apart, right? The kids lose faith in the coach. Something bad happens, and they don't ever seem to recover. And I think obviously last year, you go back to the first loss of the season at home against Georgia Tech, the way that game ended. Miami didn't really recover from that. They obviously finished 7-6, but they were 4-0 at the time. They got off to a really good start, and it just kind of spiraled into more losses. Now, look, I'm not saying you have the same leaders on this team. It's obviously changed. You've got Cam Ward here now. You've got Kiko Mauinoa at linebacker, who I think is one of the best defensive leaders this program's had in a while. But the psyche of a team, you never really know what it is until they get punched in the mouth for the first time. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see if the locker room culture has changed with this new group of leadership and some of the outside influences that have arrived.
Yes, what I hear you saying is that there was a lack of leadership in the past couple of years, and that's kind of the reason why this team just kind of spiraled downward after a loss. But I think it also has to do with the depth on the team. Naturally, football is a game of attrition. And I think Miami just has not had the depth to really kind of beat good teams late in the
Yeah.
season. So I think that's kind of a contributing factor as well.
For sure. And I agree with you. I mean, I do think this is probably one of the more deeper teams that Miami's had in a while. I think Mario's recruiting between what he's done in the transfer portal and just, really good signing classes the last two cycles. I think they've improved it pretty drastically.
Yeah,
But again, you never really know the psyche of a team until they've suffered a loss. And sometimes it's not even on the scoreboard. It might just be losing a key player, right? Somebody to injury, or if somebody were to go down on the offensive line, how would they respond? One of their leaders, if Jalen Rivers were to go down, could Samson Okunlola or somebody, Markel Bell, one of those guys, really step in and be the kind of leader that Miami needs at that position? You never know until you come across that moment. And so, while I think Mario has definitely improved the overall depth, I think it's a valid concern. Whether or not this team has the confidence it takes to take a punch. And the last one for me, Marcus, in terms of X's and O's, I think the biggest storyline as far as the team itself is who steps up to replace Cam Kitchens as Miami's quarterback on defense. That safety position, I don't know if we took Cam Kitchens for granted at times last year. There were moments fans got upset with him when he would give up a touchdown or kind of be out of position on a play. But he made a lot of plays for this team and had the respect of the room. And I think, Jaden Harris, Miami's looking at him. He filled in nicely for 2 games last year. Miami won both those games when Jaden Harris was in the starting lineup. But you've got Mish Powell coming over, who is really more of a slot corner. He'll be one of the 2 starting safeties. Mish is a guy who had a lot of success at Washington, but he wasn't the man. He wasn't Cam Kitchens. He was a slot cornerback. And I think we do take for granted the leadership position at that safety spot and what it means as
sure.
being the quote unquote quarterback of the defense. So for me, from an X's and O's perspective, that's the most intriguing storyline on the team.
Yeah, I agree with you about the quarterback of the defense because, yeah, when you lose 2 veterans like Cam Kitchens and James Williams, there's always a cause for concern for sure. But I do believe Mish Powell is ready to kind of step into that role based on, kind of the conversation that I had with him during media day and what you hear from the coaches as well. Lance Guidry had high praise for him, as well as Alex Mirabal. Alex Mirabal, the offensive line coach, called him a force, like some Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
Called him like the force on the defense and called Cam Ward the force on the offense. So I think when you use those type of, Star Wars jargon, I think it's really something that you have to, take seriously there. So I think Mish Powell should be the leader of that defense. He's a really, really, really smart guy. Parents very smart. Just comes off as a guy that can really lead that defense. And one more thing I just want to say about him is that he shared during the press conference that he goes back and forth with Cam Ward to really kind of dive
Trash talk.
into, yeah, yeah, to dive into what they saw and.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the kind of leadership that you want to see from a guy on the defense.
Yeah, I no doubt that he's going to be a great influence, and he might be the most important player on this defense just because of his being a veteran, being a guy who's won at a big level, right, getting to the national championship game. I just think it's a different role for him than maybe he's had in the past, where he
Sure.
was just one of the guys in that secondary in Washington. Now he's literally got to be a leader, and I'm not saying he can't do it. I'm just saying it's a different role, and we've got to see how he adjusts to that. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's talk about this hype train, Manny. I mean, it's crazy right now.
Yeah.
Miami being considered for national championship, after coming off a 7-6 season. It really doesn't make a lot of sense, but today's college football is totally different because of the transfer portal and recruiting as well. So teams can really kind of flip the script pretty quickly from year to year. But you've been doing this a long time, Manny, and I know there's been a lot of years where the hype has been kind of like, whoa, is this realistic? Is this unrealistic? Just compare it to like other years where the hype train was just kind of overwhelming, I guess you could say. How does this year compare to other years where there was a lot of hype going into the season?
Well, look, we've had some very hyped teams in the last few years, and I've been to a lot of ACC kickoff media day type events where Miami was picked to win the Coastal. In fact, they were picked to win the Coastal, I think, 6 times before they got rid of divisions this year and went with the full 17 team slate. So Miami's had a lot of hype; they just never lived up to it, and they were picked to win the Coastal in 2022. And didn't get the job done. They've only been to one ACC championship game since they've been in the ACC over the last 20 years. So
Right.
we've seen Miami ranked in the preseason. I think the difference here with this team is Cam Ward. And I think a lot of people nationally look at Cam Ward, they look at transfer quarterbacks in general, right? And the kind of success that those guys have had the last few years. You look at a guy like Michael Penix, right? Leaves Indiana, goes to Washington, has tremendous success, leads that team to the national championship. You look at other guys, Joe Burrow, leaves Ohio State, and within 2 years, he's got LSU winning a national championship with tremendous talent around him. So I think what's happened is the ACC isn't very strong this year. I think Florida State lost a lot from last year's championship team, the team that went 13-0 and won the league championship before getting demolished by Georgia.
Yeah.
And then you have Clemson, who had their first, single-digit win season in almost 15 or 16 years. So people have their doubts in Dabo Swinney. So Miami is sort of looked at maybe a little differently going into this year as, hey, they can win the league this year, right? There's nobody who's dominant in this league. It's been basically Florida State or Clemson since Miami joined. And so that's the feeling. And I think that's why they're getting a little bit more hyped than usual. But hey, not the first time we've seen Miami ranked in the preseason poll, and definitely not the first time we've had people say, hey, they can win the ACC.
Absolutely. Manny Navarro joining me from The Athletic today to talk a little bit Miami Hurricanes football here on the Storm Tracker podcast. So now that we've hyped up this team, right? This team is like 9.5 wins is the over under win total consensus with all the betting sites or whatnot. First of all, I want to get your opinion on that. Do you think they go over under on 9.5?
Mm-hmm.
And what win total to you would I guess convey that this team either needs to either that Cristobal needs to be on the hot seat, or is he even on the hot seat right now? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So is he on the hot seat right now to get those 9 to 10 wins? And what win total would put him on that hot seat if not?
Yeah, I don't think he's anywhere near the hot seat. He's not in the same situation Billy Napier is at Florida, because Billy Napier's had signed a 7-year deal. Mario signed a 10-year deal when he got this job. And I know Miami's brass, this is a long-term investment. So I think while we can sit here and say, hey, what if they bomb? What if this team only wins 7 games again or 6 games and is really, really disappointing? Is Mario really going to get fired? No, I think there's too many years left on his contract. I think there's too many people that are pouring money into the program right now for him to have any serious danger of being on the hot seat. But I do think what it could do is tarnish this team's reputation and Mario's reputation to the point where now you're going to start to see recruits, and really the one thing that he's been good at since he took over, not necessarily want to tie their future to Miami. And at that point, it makes the job a whole lot harder, right? He's got to kind of fix that reputation that we talked about as far as being a game day coach and as far as, not making dumb mistakes, right? And taking a knee when he needs to take a knee. So I think as long as he avoids that, even if Miami were to win, let's say 8 games, 9 games, 10 games, I think people would still see this as progress. Now, there's a lot of hype, like you said, 9.5 win total. I think they are going to win 10 games this year. I think they are going to get to the ACC championship.
Hmm.
And I do think they're going to get to the college football playoff. I think this team is too good on paper to underachieve because of Cam Ward, because of Damian Martinez, because of some of the guys that they picked up on the defensive line and in the receiver room too as well. So to me, when I look at this team, what's different about it? That was another question you asked, Marcus.
Yeah.
I think besides Cam Ward, it's the improved depth at on the defensive line and at receiver. You have legitimate, 3, 4 receivers that are dangerous threats between Restrepo, Jacoby George, Sam Brown, Isaiah Horton,
Yeah.
some of the younger guys that they have, and then I think defensive line they are a solid 2, 3 deep at defensive tackle and edge rusher. There are guys that are legit dudes there at that position. So to me, because Mario has built it the right way on the lines, I think that's what's different about this team, and that's why I'm buying them.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think this team does get at least 10 wins. I would put in that bet now if anybody's watching this for betting information. I wouldn't say bet the house on it, but if your normal increment, I would say go ahead and put money on the Hurricanes to get 10 wins. I think it does depend on the health, though, of Cam Ward. I'm not totally sold on the quarterbacks behind him to get that 10 win mark, but I do feel like this team is extremely talented. I mean, as far as me covering the team, this is the most I've been covering this team since about 2018, and this is the most talented team that I've seen from them. So it's hard to imagine this team producing another subpar season like we've seen in the past couple of years.
I agree. And this is year 3. And I think the fact that they've got the coordinators back and 8 of the 10 assistant coaches who were here last year, when you have some continuity on your staff, when you've got continuity in terms of guys that have now been ingrained in your system for a couple of years, offensive, defensive line, those are things that have staying power, Marcus. And like you said, as long as Cam Ward is healthy and upright, I think this team will get to 10 wins.
Absolutely. So when you look at these position groups, I think Miami seemed to have improved or kind of stayed the course or stayed on par with the level of talent. But this defensive line, Manny, I do want to talk about it a little bit. We didn't really kind of discuss this beforehand, but this defensive line was pretty good last season. I believe they're ranked 11th, just allowing 3.3 yards a rush, about 105 yards per game. Second in the ACC, just behind Louisville, who was in the ACC championship game. But it seemed like this defensive line has leveled up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you add a Simeon Barrow, you add a Tyler Barron, you add an Elijah Alston, all those guys off the charts statistically and very likely going to be drafted in next year's NFL draft. How much better do you think this defensive line is with these additions?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I mean, I chart the entire ACC teams based on blue chip talent, combined starts, combined snaps, etc. The only team with more combined starts on their defensive line than Miami in the ACC is Louisville, and they've got a bunch of old heads. But Miami is 7, 8 deep at that position in terms of guys that they can roll in and out that have played double digit games. It started double-digit games in their career. I mean, Ruben Bain arguably is the best of the bunch, winning the ACC Defensive Freshman of the Year. He's a guy that you look at his Pro Football Focus scores. I mean, he's one of the best in the country. He's somebody that everybody expects to be a star going forward. And then, you get some wily veterans. I think 2 guys that came in, we look at defensive tackle in particular, but 2 guys that came in that I think fit really, really well, and they were here in the spring, is CJ Clark and Marley Cook at that defensive tackle spot. And, you look at Miami last year, Leonard Taylor, Jared Harrison Hunt, right? Some of the guys who played a whole lot of snaps. I think these are upgrades over those 2 guys in terms of just consistency and ability. And then you throw in, guys that just got here like Justin Scott, who, by the way, he made, Bruce Feldman's freaks list this past week. He was number 75 on the list. Justin Scott is no pushover. 5-star talent from Illinois, a guy that Mario Cristobal is very, very excited about internally. A guy that they think that as the season progresses will be in the mix and getting some meaningful snaps. So to me, the greatest Miami teams win with with elite defensive line, and it's not just Miami. It's Alabama, it's Georgia, it's Ohio State. Go through the annals of all the national championship winning programs. It's because of defensive linemen. They dominate the line of scrimmage. They shut down the run. They get pressure on the quarterback. Elite defenses win championships. And to me, Miami isn't necessarily at that level yet. This isn't an Alabama, Georgia defensive line yet. But man, they're a lot closer to what those teams put on paper and on the field every single year.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. I'm really excited to really kind of see how could this defensive line can be not only stopping the run, but rushing the passer. I think rushing the passer, I think it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that this team is going to be dominant with players like, Ruben Bain, Barron, and all these other guys. But stopping the run, I'm just like, wow, I think they can be elite in that area as well, just because Akeem Mesidor, who Lance Guidry said this week is really, doing well and recovering from that injury. So it looks like we're going to get 2022 Mesidor added to, all this other talent on this defensive line. So as far as depth concerned, defensive line may be the strongest, but overall depth, I think it has been upgraded as well. But specifically, the defensive backs, I think, have a question mark when it comes to depth is concerned because Guidry kind of mentioned this week as well that, they're using guys in different spots that he normally wouldn't want to when it comes to the nickel position. Like some cornerbacks are basically backing up the nickel and safety and vice versa, that type of thing. So when you look at this team as far as depth is concerned, what position group concerns you? And does this team have enough depth to sustain injuries this season?
Yeah, I think when you think about what it would take to win a national championship, right? 16 games. I think the more, the longer the season gets here in the years to come. It used to be, 12 games, 13 games to win a national championship. Now we're going up to 16 with how many you could end up playing. I think that's where we're going to see the Ohio States and the Georgias and the Alabamas, who have been absolutely dominant in terms of stacking talent year after year after year after year. That's where they're going to have an advantage. And again, Mario is just beginning to recruit like those teams do on an annual basis, right? Back to back, top 7 ranked recruiting classes or whatever. The way that he's done it these last 2 cycles, they're just not there yet, though, where you can say they have the depth. And I think one position that I look at in particular, besides defensive line as far as being deep and receiver being deep, to me, I think positions that lack depth is, as you mentioned, the secondary. And then I'm going to say a position that may freak Miami fans out, and they may sit there and call me stupid, but I'm going to say offensive line. And part of that is just because you've got a bunch of young guys going into their second year on the offensive line, guys that I think are going to be really good players here down the road. But offensive line is one of those positions. It takes a couple years to really build that depth. And Mario, outside of getting Zach Carpenter in the transfer portal, didn't feel the need to go out and bring in more experience. Just in case there are injuries, right? Just in case guys go down. You're going to have a new starting left guard in Matthew McCoy, who's played a total of 162 snaps his first couple years in college. He's going to be the guy who, has to sit there and play next to 4 veterans. But beyond him, who's going to be in the starting lineup playing a lot, you've got Ryan Rodriguez, who played, started the bowl game, and you've got Luis Cristobal, Mario's nephew, who started 6 games in his career at Georgia State and really is kind of like an emergency center. Everybody else on this offensive line, Samson Okunlola, Antonio Tripp, Bruno Kinsler, Frankie Tinalau, Markel Bell, the JUCO transfer, Derek Klasny, Frank Avila, Juan Manaya, none of those guys have played any meaningful snaps. And so if Jalen Rivers were to go down, or Inez Cooper were to go down, or Francis Maui Noah were to go down, sure, you'd have talent. You have a Samson Okunlola you can turn to, right? You have, if something were to happen to Zach Carpenter, you could throw in Ryan Rodriguez or Luis Cristobal. But if something would happen to those other guys that I just mentioned at the offensive tackle spot, or God forbid, Inez Cooper, who's a dominant physical guard up front, you're throwing in somebody who's really, really green. And again, you're talking about winning 16 games. It's hard to do unless you have health. And if guys go down, the teams like Alabama and Georgia are going to be more prepared to handle those losses than a Miami or a Florida State or somebody who's still trying to recruit to that level.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think offensive line depth is something that people are overlooking. I think just based on the success from last season, I think Miami Hurricanes fans kind of believe that they can just plug in and play guys. And I'm personally a little worried about Matthew McCoy just because of his lack of experience and if he is going to, perform at a high level. It's not easy to replace a player like Javion Cohen, who was, really dominant at that position or was solid, for Miami last season. So I agree with you. I think you would put in guys in precarious situations if they have to kind of step in because of an injury. But I do believe in Mario Cristobal and Mirabal really training up those guys or
Yeah.
coaching up those guys to step in. But yeah, it is definitely a concern down the line.
Yeah, and I would say the secondary. It's obvious, that Guidry. He talked about this on media day, and he's mentioned it a couple times. The secondary, he's looking for a fourth and fifth cornerback. So and he's looking for more safety depth. That's certainly a position that, when you look at recruiting and what Miami has brought in at that position, it is not elite level guys. Damari Brown is a blue chipper. Jadis Richards, a former blue chipper. You have Markeith Williams, Robert Stafford, Zaquan Patterson. I know they like the guys from Aquinas, but there's not a bunch of 5 stars in that secondary like other teams, like a Georgia, like an Alabama, like an Ohio State have. And if you're going to win a national championship, you need to have that level of talent everywhere. I know Michigan didn't necessarily have to do that. They won the game. I think they won the national championship, I think, with the 11th best rated class in the country, combined roster in terms of talent and blue chippers, etc. But get to game 16, get to game 17. God forbid you got to go in as a wild card. You're probably not making it through the season healthy. And so I just think the questions pertaining to depth, I don't think Miami has enough depth in the secondary or on the offensive line. Proven depth on the offensive line. I would say they've got talent. I think the bigger issue is the secondary.
I'm sure the team is hoping to prove Manny Navarro wrong on that front. Manny Navarro joining me today once again from The Athletic. I really appreciate you joining me today. And hopefully I can see you again soon and we can talk about, some more projections and see if they're getting close to that 10-win mark.
I'd love to, Marcus. Just let me know, and I'll be happy to jump back on and talk football with you.
Awesome. Great stuff. Once again, Manny Navarro from The Athletic. That's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the website, canescounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also, subscribe to this podcast on all platforms and also subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Until the next episode.